This is the Rodney Bull Show, bringing you truth about money they never taught you. Now, here's your host, the man himself, Rodney Bull.
G'day, legends. And what's cracking, money stackers? Welcome back to the Rodney Bull Show. Today's guest is someone who's spent years challenging the way people think about money, government, freedom, and the systems that most of us are taught to simply accept without question. Dan Behrman, also known as Taxation is Theft. Dan Behrman, as you can tell by the wonderful hat on his head, is an author, a political activist, and outspoken advocate for personal freedom, decentralisation, and financial sovereignty. Over the last 2 decades, Dan's built a reputation for challenging mainstream narratives around taxation and government power and monetary systems and individual rights, and won some big legal battles, I believe. So he's also the author of Taxation is Theft, How Politicians Rob You Blind, and another book, Crash the Fed, which I tend to agree with, where he argues that many of financial and political systems we rely on today are fundamentally broken, and that individuals need to better understand how those systems actually work and if they want more freedom and control for their lives. So whether people agree with him or not, and I tend to myself a bit in some ways, he forces people to ask a deeper question about authority, money and incentives, and the relationship between the individual and the state, which is what this podcast is all about as well, trying to ask them deeper questions and get people to think, So in a world where more people are questioning institutions and inflation and debt and surveillance and all of that, it's becoming harder and harder to ignore. So if you're ready for a conversation that challenges assumptions and pushes into some uncomfortable territory, this one's definitely going to make you think, folks. So let's get into it, Dan Behrman, welcome to the show, mate.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, mate, it's a real pleasure to have you here. I've been waiting for a while to talk to you, so I've been pretty excited about getting on and digging into this subject, mate. It's
Awesome.
I believe it's a bloody good thing of what you're doing out there, mate, and been doing for a long time by the sounds of it, trying to wake people up and make people question the mainstream narratives that have been indoctrinated and brainwashed into us over time.
Yeah. It's it's a pretty deep subject. It can be overwhelming. I know a lot of people they slip themselves into denial because nobody wants to it's like if you tell someone you're living in a world that's run by sociopaths and they're stealing from all of us, and the only way this ends is absolute destruction. Nobody wants to hear that. And so
It's not a happy
even
message,
when it's
is
the
it?
truth, and it's like they'll fight with you. That can't be true. If that was true, it would be all over the news, right? uh, so it's kind of natural, like it's part of our survival instinct, right? And it's also part of our survival instinct to kind of, if there's one person saying like, it's fine, everything's going to be fine, you're all going to be safe, which is what the politicians tell us. Then it's kind of like it's our natural instinct to kind of like beta up to those guys and be like, okay, these are the alphas, they know what's going on, they're gonna make sure everything's good, we'll just go keep doing our jobs and doing our things, and like everything's gonna be all right. And that's the mentality a lot of people have, which is sad, because the reality is there are some very, very sick, corrupt people controlling some very powerful institutions in this world, and the only reason they're able to do that is because of all of us. And like we play along with their game. They lay out the game for us and we play it. And a very, very small percentage of us want to step out of that game. And an even smaller percentage of us are able to, because they put borders around it, right? To keep us in, right? You can't get out of the banking system without them being able to track everything. And so, it's a really difficult task. And then you look at most of the, people who are just trying to live their lives and, be with their family and, whatever they want to do with their life. And they hear all this and they're like, that sounds like a lot of work. I don't want to deal with that. Let's just let the politicians handle it. And sadly, that's how we stay in this position that we're in.
Yeah, so true, mate. So true. So Dan, you've spent years challenging the way that people think about taxation and money and government and how that affects our personal freedom. I wanted you to go right back to the beginning, mate. What was the moment where you realised financial and political system wasn't operating the way most people believe it is, and what you needed to start questioning the entire framework itself.
Um, I would say there were several events. I'll say this first one was kind of an interesting story. So when I was in my early 20s, I was like, man, I hate being broke. I want to learn how to make some money. And I
Remember
started.
that?
There was this, everyone's got a get rich quick scheme, right? And I was like, these all this stuff sounds too good to be true. But then there was this big thing like circus coming through town, of all these like people who were like, oh, here's how you make money investing in real estate or stock markets and like all this other stuff. And so I went because it was a free event, and it turned out this was like somehow I think tied into the whole Trump University thing back then, because Trump actually came out and he was the keynote speaker there, and it was really bizarre because this had to be like early 2000s, and I remember like during his
Okay.
speech people started chanting President Trump, and like this is like before he ever ran, so it's kind of weird looking back on that, but. So I was kind of walking, from room to room, listening to some of these people's pitches. And this one guy was how to not pay taxes. And I was like, well, that sounds great because I hate taxes. I'm working all this, I'm trying to make all these businesses and make some money. And the government wants to just steal from me. Like, yeah, let me see what this guy wants to talk about. So I go in there, and his whole thing was just, how to structure your deductions and all this other stuff. And I was like, okay, well, I guess that's fine. It's not great. They're still stealing something, right? But then this old guy kind of stood up, and I remember he had like a cane, and he was this like big, like round old guy with a big white beard and everything. And he was like, as soon as the guy started talking about taxes, he was just like, it's unconstitutional. And he gets up and he just like slowly walks out with his cane. And like I was like, what? And I was like, man, as soon as I left that place and I got home, I just started Googling all that stuff. This was back when like Google was like the only search engine that worked. And I was like, income tax, unconstitutional. I started finding all this really interesting information that turned me on to Ron Paul. That turned me on to Aaron Russo made this documentary, which is available on YouTube, called America, Freedom to Fascism, which started out where he heard about people who were not paying income tax, and he wanted to investigate it. So, and do a documentary on it. So he did this, and he started interviewing. He interviewed the chair of the IRS and like all this crazy stuff. But the whole documentary, which was supposed to be on that, took a turn when he started finding out information about the Federal Reserve. And so he actually went with his like big film crew to the Federal Reserve, and they were like, "Oh, you can't come in here with cameras and everything." And it was really bizarre because like it's like this was the first time that I realized, because he pointed it out, that the Federal Reserve is actually private property.
Yeah.
Like it's a private organization, and so this kind of like
Can
all
I
this
just
kind of
cut
stuff
in there for a second,
down that
Dan, and
rabbit
just
hole.
get you to explain to the audience what the Federal Reserve is? Because some people may not know, may not have even heard of it here in my country, especially in
Sure.
Australia.
So the Federal Reserve is basically it's the Rothschild Bank. So basically what happened was around the turn of the century, you have all these bankers who are basically like, look, we know how to make money, right? You get countries to go to war, and you lend them the money, and they'll pay you interest, and they'll just they'll steal it from other people and give it to us, because these banks, they can't steal from people themselves, right? They need governments to steal from people. So now, of course, you can sugarcoat that whole story and say like, "Oh no, it's necessary to keep the governments going. We were doing them favors and all." You can sugarcoat it all you want, but realistically, a lot of these banks were funding both sides of multiple wars. So what happened was, they made this agreement with the government. So up until this point, governments were usually making their own money. Sometimes it was paper, sometimes it was gold. Even when it was paper, they'd print it into oblivion, and it would be absolutely worthless. But now they transferred that power to the Federal Reserve, which basically became a private bank that was going to issue the money for the United States government. Um, and through this, over the last 100 years, they were able to transfer all of the government's wealth into a private bank. So all of the gold that was believed to have been in Fort Knox, a lot of people believe is now property of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve holds gold from many different countries on deposit, and this is, you might have heard in the 70s, Nixon said, "Hey, we're going to close the gold window," which there wasn't actually a gold window, but he's like, "We're not going to let
Temporarily.
people get their gold back." And these were like countries, right? These were countries that were trading, and it's a, I don't want to get into the complexity of that yet, but basically, like they needed a central place to store all this gold so that when people were trading stuff back and forth, they could, tally up in there. So now you have private banks that are doing that, and then what they're doing is they're saying, instead of the government printing your money, we're going to lend it to you. So now the government's basically paying interest on their own money. Money that, like, not to say that they should be printing it themselves or anyone should be printing it, but money that they could have printed it, that they could have printed themselves, and that they were printing themselves until this private bank came along. So now they've created a system where, um, it's basically like the this private bank has become the casino. The governments around the world are playing with their chips, and the house always wins. So they're transferring wealth from the citizens by taxing them and creating this enormous debt, which ultimately transfers all the wealth from the government to these banks. And so this started with the Federal Reserve of the United States, and it started expanding all over the place. And then there's the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, and there's like a whole history of how this all worked. Nobody really knows who owns the Federal Reserve, because when it was started, it took a small deposit from various different private banks in the U.S. They kind of know who some of those families were, but ultimately they kind of control everything. And so now this is the organization that sets interest rates and like all this other scary stuff that like manipulates the economy, right? Whenever there's a recession or depression, whenever the stock market's going up and down, whenever the housing markets are tanking, these private banks are the ones manipulating the numbers to make that happen. And the government's like, oh, well, we set the policies, or we get to pick the guy who gets to sit at the head of the table at that organization. And it's like, yeah, sure, you might get to do that, but like at the end of the day, they're calling the shots. And so the reality is these banks are like, whenever we complain about like prices are going up, or there aren't enough jobs, or like things are getting tight, it all comes down to this bank. And a lot of it's government policy, but it all comes down to this bank.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry, that's the long short story of what the
Yeah,
Federal
no,
Reserve
that's
is.
all right. No, no, you explained it pretty well, mate. Just wanted to try and help the audience understand exactly what it is when you're talking about the Fed or the
Yeah,
Federal Reserve, because a lot of people here in Australia and all around the world may not even know who they are. And basically, I know who they are. I've done a lot of research into them myself, and they're a central bank, and they're like the central bank. And most countries around the world have one. We have one here in Australia. It's called the RBA, the Reserve Bank of Australia, which is ultimately, as best as I can tell, is owned and run through the BOE. Ultimately, when you look back through it, as best as I can tell, and I could be wrong on
yeah.
that, but
It's well, no, you guys still have well, I guess it's probably not the Queen anymore, but like you still had the Queen on your money, right? Queen of England
yeah,
for
yeah, we got the
for
king on there now.
yeah. So yeah, it's like why is that? And it's really interesting, but like this is what's even more interesting. So when you look at the money, so first of all, you call your money dollars, right?
Yep, yeah,
So
Australian dollar. Yep,
so what is a dollar? Like, and like
a
we can get
shitty
into
piece
like,
of
oh
paper,
well,
mate, with some faces on it.
right. But like, okay,
Not even
so
paper; it's plastic these days.
so this is what's interesting. I knew someone who was in Mexico basically trying to get everyone to adopt Bitcoin. And so the pushback that she was getting was, it's not real money. Why do I want to accept this? And so I told her, like, because what they call real money is the peso, right? I told, and these are people who speak Spanish, so they should know what a peso is, right? So I tell her, tell them to take out some of the real money and look at it and say, what is that called? It's a peso, which in Spanish means weight,
Yeah,
and ask how much does it weigh? And the reason it's called a peso is because it used to be redeemable for gold and silver, and that's what made it money, right? Because like gold and silver, I don't know if you want me to explain that, but like gold and silver is like those are finite resources, right? Whereas paper, anyone can just print as much as they want. So paper's kind of worthless. But the reason and nobody alive today really remembers this because we've all had paper for that long. But the reason paper is or plastic is worth anything is because they're promises, they're notes. I don't know if your currency says a note on there, but it's in the US, everything says it's a note. which
Yep.
means it's basically it's a promise. It's a promise to pay you that gold or silver. And then they stop saying, oh, no, it's just a promise now. What's it backed by? Absolutely nothing, but it's a promise. We promise you it's worth something. But so this is what's interesting about the dollar, right? Like what does a dollar mean, right? Does it mean weight, like a peso? Well, dollar actually comes from it's a German word thaler, which
Yep.
there's this town in I think it's outside of Austria. And I don't want to try to pronounce it because it's a long, but it's like Thaler or something, right? And so what happened was this became a big silver mining town, and they were printing silver coin, or they were making silver coins out of what they were mining. And so a dollar or a thaler became a standard. Basically, it wasn't exactly 1 ounce, but it was some 30 something number of grams of silver. And that was what a dollar was, right? So that's why we're using dollars now, because like it went through that transition. First, it was like, oh, this is a dollar. It's well, first these are thalers, right? These are silver coins, and then it was we're gonna make our own silver coins, and we'll still call them dollars. And then through the evolution of language, and things change a little bit, right? We
Yep.
both speak English, but a little bit different. So it became the dollar, and so now any country that uses a dollar was basically, if you go back far enough, they were based on those silver dollar coins. But now we just have this paper, and so there was a transition, and it took a long time for them to do that. But the whole swindle is that they can print money whenever they want. And when they
And
do
they
that,
do.
it's a tax on everybody. It's yeah, they do it all the time. And it's not even like, oh, we need some more money, we're gonna do it. It's like, no, it's become like just constantly print. Like it's like, oh, we'll tweak the numbers. We're gonna print 3% more this year, 2% more, whatever it is, but they're just constantly printing. And now they do it electronically too, so they don't even have to run the printing presses. And it's really fascinating when you find out like all this weird stuff. Like, okay, so you're telling me in the US, the government is the one with the printing press buying all the ink and the paper and printing the actual bills, but they're putting the name of a private bank on there. And every time they print one, they owe that bank money, even though the government just printed this bill that's not even backed by anything.
It
It
blows
makes
your head up, doesn't it?
absolutely no sense when you say it out loud like that, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. Absolutely
It's
crazy.
it's the whole point of it is like, like if I were to just bump into you in public, you bumped into me, you owe me $1,000. Like that's how stupid it is, right? But there's politicians saying like, oh no, we got to pay back this bank, we have all this debt, we need to increase taxes to pay the, like, and it's like, no, you don't, just tell them to fuck off. Excuse me, I don't know if I can swear on this one,
Yeah,
but
you're right, mate. You're right.
like it's like tell them we're not going to pay it, right? And what are they going to do? They don't have an army. They have like anytime the bank wants to do something around the world, they'll use the US Army. The US becomes the proxy for the bank, right? And like different countries, like their militaries become that. Otherwise, the government becomes a proxy for whatever the government wants or whatever the bank wants to steal, right? We need more taxes. We need more revenue. Go raise your taxes. Go pass this policy. Oh, there's this new cryptocurrency that's like it prevents it's Monero, right? I use Monero. It prevents people from knowing who owns the money and hiding transactions whenever it transfers. So what do the banks do? The banks go to all the governments in the world and say we have to ban this.
Yeah,
We'll allow Bitcoin because we know it's traceable now. They fought it at first because they thought it was anonymous. Then they found out a way to trace it, and they're like, okay, we can allow this, right?
yeah,
So it's yeah, they're calling the shots, and it's really it's complex, but at the end of the day, it's not. It's you can look at it and say, look, we're getting ripped off here, and it needs to end. You don't need to like understand exactly how the machine works to say we need to pull the plug.
yeah, yeah. Well, there's been many fiat currencies, and that's what our money is fiat currency. And there's been many versions of it throughout history. From my experience and of research and that on it, and through learning from a wonderful person from over in your country, of America, Mike Maloney. His research into it, into money, the history of money and fiat currency. Like there's been over 4,800 of them throughout history, as best as him and many other people have been able to research uh, hundreds and thousands of years into money for humans, and every last one of them have gone to their intrinsic value of zero. They've all go to zero. They all fail, and but the system that we're in now that's been running our world for the last 100 years, and especially after we broke away, Nixon took us off the so-called gold standard in 71 temporarily, 53 years later temporarily,
Right.
whatever, 55 years or something, like this one's been an experiment like no other, like never before has the world all together at once been running under fiat currency and all being backed ultimately to the American dollar. The US dollar is the reserve currency of the world, which is backed by nothing but full
Yeah.
faith
And
of
I
the
mean
American government.
they've assassinated world leaders who have tried to oppose them. BRICS is going pretty strong now, but that's
Yeah,
because they've got like giants like China and Russia and Brazil and India, like massive countries trying to come up with their own thing. But at the end of the day, it's more than likely what's going to happen is it's going to be the same thing, right? It's going to be maybe these bankers who are running the show right now lose their foothold. But it's going to be other countries that are basically they're issuing the same fiat, right? Now, I'll give it to some of these countries like I know China makes it available for people to like buy, gold and silver out of ATM machines, which is pretty awesome. But at the same time, it's not like a total free country, right? It's not like they're saying like,
yeah,
we're whatever the people want, they can have, right? They're still saying like we're going to shape the economy the way we believe it should be shaped. And ultimately that's, it's wrong. It goes against human nature. Like if you create something and people want to participate in that, fine. But if you create something and you make everyone else participate in it, that's slavery.
yeah,
And it's interesting to see that like there are many forms of this that are accepted around the world that people don't actually identify as slavery. But it's like in reality, they're actually very, very similar. And this is really interesting too, because uh it's a concept that most people don't really understand because when they're told slavery, they picture, right? They picture these, especially in the U.S., a white plantation owner just whipping black slaves all day. There's racism, there's violence, there's all this stuff, and a lot of that stuff happened, absolutely. But that wasn't the purpose of slavery. The purpose of slavery was to extract the labor of other people. And right now, like it's like you want to build a thing, right? You want to build the pyramids in Egypt. You have these pharaohs who are like, I want a pyramid. I can't build that myself. I'm going to have tens of thousands of people build it for me. I can either give them something, which, what do you have? Like, a desert full of sand. What can I give you? Right. I can give you promises about the afterlife and everything else. Or I can say you have to do it if you want to live. And so you have these two different systems. Now, in the system we have today, it's like, okay, there's slavery where we say, do it or we'll kill you or we'll beat you. But today they came up with this clever system where it's like, no, you're working for yourself. You're doing whatever you want. This is how you don't have to go work in a farm, right? Someone's providing the food for you. And so as long as you go do this job over here, you'll get the food from over here. And what people don't understand is that it's a net. I mean, a lot of people feel it, but it's a net loss for everybody, right? You're putting out more labor than you're receiving benefit, right? Like if you think back to like, okay, wipe out the entire planet, stick some people there and be like, look, there's food everywhere. You can try to grow some if you want. How much of your day are you going to spend foraging for food, hunting, and building a shelter? And once you've already got your shelter, you're probably not going to spend a whole lot more time building it, right? Maybe, fixing stuff every once in a while, but you're going to spend your time getting food. Is it going to be 40 hours a week or less? Right. And
yeah,
so now we have this thing and it's like, okay, I only work 40 hours a week and I have a shelter, I have food, I have electricity, I have a refrigerator, I have TV, I have endless entertainment, all this other stuff. And like you're still getting all of that for 40 hours. So it feels like you're getting a lot of stuff because of society. But in reality, if you were to take the actual number of labor hours that it costs to produce all this stuff and like divide it up and see like how many hours of work am I actually working to get that? you're actually getting less. Now I know like this probably some people are going to hear this and think like, oh, that sounds like Marxism because you're the labor theory of whatever every hour whoever. And no, it's not about that. What I'm trying to say is with the advancements of technology, if everyone was to say like, hey, look, we don't need this stuff because what we're doing is we're putting our energy in here and we're getting money out of it, and we don't know like what's the actual value of what we created, right? Because it just goes into this ominous system and like it just floats around and it's like
Yep.
what somebody else is making a profit off of it, sure, and that's fine, but it's like at the end of the day it's like, do I really need to work this hard just to keep the roof over my head and just to feed myself? Or what if I were to say, you know what, this is too much work. I'm gonna go move out to the woods, build my own shelter, and raise a family and do some of these other things that I can't afford to do now because I'm spending so much time on my job and everything else. I don't have time to spend on that. I can't afford time wise, right? I have money, I don't have time. But if I were to like kind of disconnect from society and say, I'm going to spend my time on things that are more important to me, would I still be able to eat? Would I still have a shelter? Yes, absolutely. Because I mean, that's how we survived for, tens of thousands of years before we started
Yeah.
getting all this technology and everything else. So the reality is like we're getting screwed here. And like now we have technology. So, where it used to take one person maybe, 10 hours a week to feed themselves or their family, 20 hours to feed an entire family. Now it's like a farmer can spend 1 hour a day and feed 1,000 people,
Yeah.
feed 1,000 people. And that's because of technology and everything else. So if it's easier to produce everything, why are we working harder? And the reason for that is taxes. And this comes into the bank again, right? Why are they always concerned with 0% unemployment?
Good
Isn't
question.
that like, isn't that like the whole like slavery concept of like we don't want idle hands because that's when people start, starting trouble. They start doing their own things instead of the work they're supposed to do. They might quit and say, I found something better, right? No,
Yeah.
you keep people working around the clock. And because you want them to produce the things that you want them to produce. And as soon as and then you tax them and say, oh, well, I see you earned some money, but we're going to take some of that. So now they have to work harder, right? And they can't like, and it never adds up. It's always a net loss. They're always taking from these people. And so people will say like, oh, well, society needs to function, but it's yeah, like it will function without this stuff because we didn't have this stuff for the last, 10,000 years. This is all new. Well, do we really need it, or did you just tell us we needed it? And now that we have it, you're telling us the world's going to collapse if we take it away. Like,
So true.
what's really going on?
Yeah, yeah, and then you got to ask the question, eh? Because I've no doubt I have felt it myself much through the years, and I know plenty of other people feel the same way. That you're just like a rat in a cage, stuck in a hamster wheel, eh? You're just going nowhere in the so-called rat
Yeah,
race. It's just, and it's so disheartening to work so hard and ultimately just really feel yourself going backwards over time. Like it's
yeah,
just it's not
yeah.
it's not right. It's
It,
not fair, and it's not right, mate. Like there's ultimately they're stealing your life away from you through your most important commodity that we have in life, and our most precious commodity, which is our time. You've got to give up your time to be able to go and work your labor to be able to go and earn this money that they control us through, and then take half of it off you. Like it's just
yeah,
madness, absolute
yeah,
madness. So,
absolutely.
um,
It's,
I'd like to ask you, a lot of people hear these ideas, Dan, and immediately think sovereign citizen or conspiracy theories. So, how do you separate what you're talking about from that world? And what do people misunderstand most about your message and what you're actually advocating for?
yeah, it's tough, right? So I think there are two separate issues. You have the conspiracy theories, right? When I start talking about this stuff, a lot of people, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. That's not true. Um, they're being a lot more open about it these days. So but like at the same time, people just don't understand it, right? Or they don't want to believe that like, okay, sure, it's a private bank, but so what does that matter, right? Like that doesn't mean it's an evil private bank. Oh, so do you love your bank? Like your little neighborhood bank? Are they good to you? Well, no, they're crap. All the banks are crap. Oh, but this big one that controls the entire government, that's the good guys, right? Um, but it comes back to that, like it's a psychological disorder that we all have, where it's like we just shut off our brains to the reality because ignorance is bliss, right? So it's really hard to kind of crack that over people's heads to the point where they see it. Um, but what one approach that I try to take is to show them that there's actually a better life out there for them if we can get this parasite off of our backs. And I think that's kind of what really gets to people because for I want to say like things haven't always been this bad as they are now. And it's like you look back and it's like, yeah, you look at like the early 2000s, you look at the 80s, and like, yeah, they had all kinds of crashes and crazy stuff going on. But it's like you look back at that and it's like people felt a little bit more comfortable. Um, but it's like now we have more stuff, more technology, we have phones in our pockets, all this other stuff, but people are feeling more stressed out because the amount of debt that we're carrying is actually going up. So I think like by explaining to people like, look, you're feeling it now. And there's a better life. There's a better life than this, right? We can get rid of all this stuff. We can wipe this stuff out. It doesn't need to be here. And so when people start hearing that, like I think they realize, like, okay, maybe this is something I should listen to. It's not just like, oh, there's a conspiracy like when you oh, there's a conspiracy, there's aliens. It's like, okay, what does it matter if there's aliens? Like if they were attacking us, we'd be able to look up and see it, right? There's no
Yeah, for
aliens. If
sure.
there were aliens, it wouldn't matter. But like in this way, you can say like, okay, forget about whether or not it's real for a second. Are you hurting right now? And people are gonna say, yeah, yeah, of course I am. Why? Well, I have all these bills to pay. What are those bills? Debt. Why do you have so much debt? Where does this debt go? To the banks. What is this money? It's imaginary money. And I think a lot of people kind of get this. And so when you go there, then you start dealing with the problem of, okay, but what do I do about it? Because I'm just me. I'm helpless. I'm powerless. There's nothing we can do about it. And this gets into the sovereign citizen question because so years ago, I got rid of my driver's license. I've been driving around the United States and now I've been in Mexico for about 10 years. Haven't had a driver's license in like 20.
Okay.
I've gotten stopped by the cops plenty of times. In Mexico, they usually don't even care. In the United States, um, sometimes I'll get a ticket and I'll even try to go to court to fight it. And it's gone. Like it's not in the system or something happened, right? Or the cops don't show up. And it's like, and I go there like saying like, no, I want to argue this. I want to prove out the point that I don't need a license. Um, but the way that I do it, and I know there's like, you can go on YouTube right now and find like a dozen people getting pulled over and they say, I'm not driving, I'm traveling. And then they get arrested by the cops. And like you can see the same thing in courts, right? And so it's interesting because I look at a lot of these videos and I say, well, I would have done that differently. Um, and there's never any like smoking gun. So people ask me like, well, where's the law that says you don't need a license? Well, there isn't one. But the law that says you do need a license is an extremely vague gray area. And you'll see a lot of people that like they kind of like sovereign citizens, right? They kind of like follow this weird rhetoric and they come up with like crazy stuff about like, you know, oh, when you're born, you're birthed like a ship, and the person who delivers you is a doctor, like a dock at a
Yeah, yeah,
shipyard. And
yeah. I've
okay,
heard it
you're
all.
just stupid word games. This is all absolute nonsense, right? This has nothing to do with like the history of these words or where they came from. Like it's all totally bogus. But they come up with that and then say, and therefore I don't need a license to drive. Now, these people, they've tried it a million times. They always end up going, I don't want to say they go to jail, but like they get arrested. They try it in court. They say, oh, my name in all caps is not me and all this other stuff. Absolute nonsense that the legal system just doesn't even recognize. So, like that kind of stuff absolutely does not work. But what I've been doing is in challenging the system is mostly just to say like I'm not going to make any assertions. You have the burden of proof, and everything is on you to prove that what you're saying is an actual law, and that you need to do this. And so I expanded that like maybe 10 years ago with my taxes. And so there are a lot of people in the US who say, there's no law that says the average American has to pay income tax. So, I tried that once or twice, failed, didn't work. IRS took all my money. But then I started asking a different question. I stopped asking, how is this possible or how do you do this? And I started asking, who has had success with this? And I found some people. I found a lot of people. And so now I'm asking the right question. And then I took another stab at it and I've been having success for like the past like 7 or 8 years now. So that is to say, going back to this point that like we're not all powerless, right? There are things that we can do, and depending on which country you're in, constitutions are written differently. Whether or not they can just outright steal from you is some places they can just do it, and there's no constitutional question or anything about it, right? Even when it comes to free speech, there are places where like, oh, free speech is in the Constitution, but we're going to arrest you for saying that thing that you said, and it doesn't matter. Like you're going to jail. You can't use free speech as a defense for what you said. You're going to jail no matter what. That happens in some places, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. So we're lucky in the U.S. that like you can push back, and they there's some semblance of like the Constitution like actually staying in place, but like in many other ways they just kind of override it. But ultimately, what it comes down to is we the people in any country have to keep our government in check, right? Like governments are going to do whatever they want. And if they see that like your government, right? They can say like, okay, you know what? We like this guy's house. We're just going to go take it. And they could do it. Who's going to stop them, right? Now, if a bunch of people get pissed off and say, we don't like that and we're going to do something about it, like kind of like I think the French and some other people, like they have their farmers, they go dump shit all over the government buildings and everything, right? That's pushing back, that's doing something. And it's enough to say like, don't mess with us, right? Um, but in other countries, people are just too afraid to do anything. They're afraid to even say it, or like, tell their family like at dinner, like we should do something about this. They're afraid because like in some countries, like your family will snitch you out, right? Because they're
Sadly, yeah.
afraid. Yeah, it's like, oh, wait. So you're telling me your son told you something at dinner and you didn't snitch him out? Well, you're going to prison too, right? Like this happens in some countries. So ultimately we have to stop being afraid and we have to push back, and we have to find ways that we can push back within the countries, within the government systems that we live in, the ways that we can push back, that if the government comes back after us, the public is going to see like, okay, the government's in the wrong here. And I know that's really hard, right? Because we have a lot of people in a lot of countries who are just like, well, the government should steal from the rich. And it's like the
Yeah.
rich, like I'm not even rich. You're just you're just saying that so you can steal my money. But it's like you have a lot of people who support a lot of government policies, and they're usually misled by politicians who say, "Oh, it's for the children," right? So it's difficult, but it's not impossible, and we just have to find out what those ways are. Um, and that's really the tricky part here, but it's different everywhere. Like even in one country, all the city governments are going to be different, but there are ways to push back, and we have to figure out what they are. You mentioned my book, Crash the Fed. And what this book basically says is stop using the currency. Like, don't invest in it. Don't save. Don't put it in your savings account. Use crypto, use gold, use silver, use anything else you possibly can, because every time you get rid of those dollars or whatever currency you have in your country, as soon as you get rid of those, they become worth less.
Yep.
And then they have to print them faster. They need to print more of them, because if it's worth less to you and everyone in your community, when the government comes to your community to buy something, even if it's your labor, government contracts and everything else, they got to give you more, which means they need to print more. Which devalues it faster and faster and faster, and eventually you will crash the bank. And if all you're holding on to is those silly dollars, that fake paper money, yeah, you're going to be screwed. But if you got rid of all your fake paper money, they can crash into oblivion, and like it won't even bother you, right? In fact, it'll be a positive for you, because let's say you have a mortgage on your house and you owe $100,000. That okay, $100,000. Well, those dollars are worthless now. What do you want me to pay you in? I'll pay you in a
Yeah.
grain of sand. Like it's the debt goes away. So ultimately it could be a net positive for a lot of people. But and all it takes is for us to just stop using their currency as much as we possibly can. Of course, like, most of us aren't going to be able to get our employers to pay us in a different currency. Um, but as soon as we get it, we get rid of it and we get something else. And just taking that money and dumping it on the open market makes the value of that go down faster and faster and faster. So the more we can do that, the better off we are.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and they're doing it themselves to us, mate, with the way they print money. The more they print, the more it steals your purchasing power, because the more money they print, the more it dilutes every dollar that's already out there in the marketplace. That you're just
Absolutely.
losing purchasing power hand over fist. Whereas if you, like you said, you convert that shitty fiat currency into real money, gold and silver, or Bitcoin, or into things like Monero, like that, you can other currencies to be able to trade in. They have real and hold real purchasing power, especially the more that they debase and print the fiat currency into oblivion.
Yeah. And they like so a lot of people will say, well, but they're printing it anyways. What's this going to do? Well, it, they're printing it, but they're controlling it as much as they possibly can. In fact, taxes taxes are used to subsidize the printing, right? Because when you like, they know, right? They're not stupid. They've seen what's happened in Zimbabwe. They've seen what's happened in the Weimar Republic. They've seen Venezuela, every other country that's like printed their money into oblivion. They know that's bad, right? And so they'll say things here in the U.S. They say, "Oh, well, a good inflation rate is 3%." They don't want to go crazy, and like sometimes they'll go up to 9% when they really need to, but the so they need money to spend, right? And so in order to get that money to spend, if they don't want to just print all of it, they need to steal it in taxes, right? So the taxes are keeping their printing down. And so what we're doing by getting rid of the currency is to force their hand to say, look, there's not that much to tax. The value of it is getting lower. So whenever it comes out of the government's always the first spender, right? Because they collect all the money from us. Interesting fact in the US, they collect the entire money supply 4 times per year. So all the US dollars that are in circulation, they take it out of circulation and it goes into the government's treasury 4 times per year. And then the government decides where to spend it from there. And that all goes to their employees and contracts, right? And then from there, it trickles down. People say trickle down economics doesn't. It works. It's just that once it gets to the bottom, they steal it right back up to the top. So, but yeah, so the printing is real, but they try to minimize it. And so when we talk about accelerating the devaluation of any currency, it basically forces the printers to print it even faster, which they don't like, but it forces them. It forces their hand to say, okay, we gotta keep printing it. And once they lose control of that, it's hyperinflation, it's down the tubes, and then it's, well, we got to get rid of it. We need a different currency.
Yeah.
And now we're holding all the cards because we have all the hard assets, right? All they have is a bunch of dollars, which are absolutely worthless, and maybe a vault full of gold that,
Yeah.
with the right revolution might not belong to them, but that's another story.
Yeah. So true, mate. So true. And and that's the thing. Like I said, I'm a firm believer. There's only two things in this world that are real money, and that's gold and silver. God put them here. They'll from here since the beginning of time. They'll be here till the end of time. And some of the other cryptocurrencies hold very interesting prospects, but they're very young in comparison to them other two things that have been money in human evolution forever and a day. And you go and do the research, and you become to understand why gold and silver became money and respected as money and appreciated as money all throughout the whole world, no matter where you go. All right, folks, we've got to pull up stumps there today, eh? Run up on time. What a bloody fabulous conversation with Dan so far. It's been really, really good. And we're going to dig into a whole lot more through the rest of this conversation. So make sure you come back again for the rest of the episode next week, folks, and listen in and catch the rest of this fabulous conversation with Taxation Dan Behrman, eh? And we will carry on and keep sharing the knowledge and the education. All right, folks, keep fighting for truth, freedom, and legacy, eh? Keep on stacking.
This has been another episode of The Rodney Bull Show, a Rebel Edge production. Please share with your family and friends, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review.